My name is Ava, and I have always been the kind of person people forget is in the room. Not because I am quiet all the time, but because no one really listens when I speak. It wasn't always like that. When I was younger, I used to believe that family meant something strong and unbreakable. I believed that no matter how far life took us, we would always turn back toward each other. But somewhere along the way, that belief faded, slowly and quietly, like light disappearing at the end of a long day. I live alone now in a small house near the coast in Europe. It's not a fancy place, but it's mine. The walls are painted soft white, and the windows are wide enough to let in the grey morning light that I've grown to love. There's a wooden table in the kitchen where I drink my coffee every morning, and a narrow hallway that creaks when I walk through it at night. Outside, the wind moves through the grass in a way that feels almost like a whisper. It's peaceful, and more importantly, it's honest. Nothing here pretends to be more than it is. The invitation came on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I had just sat down with my coffee when I noticed the envelope on the table. Thick paper. Gold lettering. My name written carefully across the front, like someone had taken time to make it look important. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. My brother Daniel had always loved things that looked expensive, even when they didn't feel real. Still, I opened it. Inside was everything you would expect from a wedding that wanted to impress people. The ceremony would take place in a large house in America, far from where I lived. There were details about the dress code, the timing, the schedule of events. Everything was planned down to the smallest moment. It felt less like an invitation and more like instructions. At the bottom, there was a note about gifts. It said contributions should start at $500. I stared at that line longer than I expected. Not because I couldn't afford it, but because it said so much without saying anything at all. It reminded me of the last time Daniel had called me, asking for money when his business was struggling. Back then, there had been no formal request, no polished words. Just urgency. Just need. And I had helped him, without question. I set the invitation down and leaned back in my chair, letting the silence of the house settle around me again. For a moment, I thought about not going. It would have been easy. I could have stayed here, in my quiet space, where nothing felt forced. Where I didn't have to pretend. But something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was habit. Or maybe, deep down, I wanted to see if there was still a place for me in that world I once called home. So I picked up the invitation again, folded it carefully, and placed it back into the envelope. And without saying it out loud, I made my decision. I would go. I arrived in America on a clear afternoon, the kind where the sky looks almost too perfect to be real. The city stretched wide and bright, full of glass buildings and fast-moving cars, nothing like the quiet coast I had left behind in Europe. Everything here felt louder, sharper, like it was trying to prove something. I took a taxi from the airport, watching the streets blur past as I held my small bag on my lap, wondering why I already felt out of place before I had even arrived. The wedding venue was exactly what I expected, and somehow more. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement. Tall white walls, polished stone steps, and windows that reflected the sky like mirrors. There were people moving everywhere, dressed in perfect clothes, speaking in low, confident voices. It felt less like a celebration and more like a performance where everyone already knew their role. I stepped out of the taxi and paused for a moment, adjusting the simple navy dress I had chosen. It wasn't expensive, but it fit well, and it felt like me. I didn't want to pretend to be anything else. As I walked toward the entrance, no one stopped me, no one greeted me. I wasn't sure if that was better or worse. Inside, the air was cool and filled with the soft sound of music. Glasses clinked somewhere in the distance, and laughter rose and fell in gentle waves. I stood there for a second, scanning the room, trying to find a familiar face. It didn't take long to spot Daniel. He was near the front, standing beside Clara, both of them surrounded by people who looked like they belonged exactly where they were. He looked different. Not in a big way, but enough that I noticed. His suit was perfectly tailored, his posture more confident, his smile practiced. He looked like someone who had built a life that didn't include looking back. I walked toward him slowly, my step steady even though something inside me felt uncertain. When I reached him, I spoke his name softly. Daniel. He turned, and for a brief moment, I saw something real in his expression, surprise, maybe even recognition. But it faded quickly, replaced by a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Ava, he said. You made it. There was no warmth in his voice, just acknowledgement, like he was checking something off a list. Before I could respond, Clara stepped closer. Her presence was immediate, controlled, and impossible to ignore. She looked at me carefully, her eyes moving from my face to my dress and back again, measuring, deciding. Oh, she said lightly, you're his sister. I nodded once. She smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. That's lovely. We're just about to start photos soon. Would you mind standing near the wall? We're keeping things clean. The word stayed in the air longer than it should have. Clean. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. I had heard enough things like that in my life to understand exactly what was being said without explanation. I simply nodded again, because that was easier than making a scene in a room where I clearly didn't belong. Of course, I said quietly. Daniel didn't say anything. He didn't defend me or question her words. He just looked away, already distracted by someone calling his name. I stepped back, letting the space between us grow, and turned toward the seating area. Rows of chairs were arranged neatly, each with a small card marking names. I found mine after a few moments, placed somewhere in the middle, not close, not far, just another detail arranged to keep everything balanced. But when I reached the chair, someone was already sitting there. A man I had never seen before leaned back comfortably, holding a drink in one hand, laughing at something someone beside him had said. He didn't even notice me at first. That's my seat, I said, keeping my voice calm. He glanced up, then shrugged like it didn't matter. They told me to sit here. Before I could respond, a woman walked past, someone I recognized vaguely as one of Clara's relatives. We had to rearrange a few things, she said without stopping. Hope that's okay. And then she was gone. Just like that. No apology. No explanation. Just an assumption that I would accept it. I stood there for a moment, looking at the chair that was supposed to be mine, then at the man who had taken it so easily. He had already gone back to his conversation, completely uninterested in the fact that I was still standing there. So I stepped away. I moved toward the edge of the room, near one of the tall white walls, exactly where Clara had suggested. From there, I could see everything without being part of anything. The guests continued to talk and laugh, moving around me like I was part of the background. No one asked if I needed anything. No one noticed that I was alone. I folded my hands in front of me and stayed still, letting the moment stretch. It wasn't just about the seat, or the wall, or even the way Clara had spoken to me. It was about something deeper, something that had been building for years without me fully admitting it. Every small dismissal, every ignored call, every time I had been made to feel like I was an extra in someone else's life, it was all there, quiet but heavy. From across the room, I watched Daniel laugh again, his arm resting casually around Clara. He looked happy, comfortable, like this was exactly where he wanted to be. And maybe it was. But standing there, near the wall, I realized something that felt both simple and sharp at the same time. There was no place for me here. Not really. And maybe there never had been. I stayed near the wall longer than I expected. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that once the photos were done, once people settled into their seats, something would shift. Someone would notice me, call me over, make space. But nothing changed. Time passed quietly, measured only by the music drifting through the room and the steady movement of people who seemed completely at ease. From where I stood, I could see everything clearly. The photographers adjusting their cameras, giving instructions in cheerful voices. Clara moving gracefully from one group to another, her smile never fading. Daniel beside her, nodding, laughing, playing his part perfectly. Every moment looked polished, like it had been rehearsed. I watched as family members gathered for photos. Close relatives stood at the center, their positions carefully arranged. Then extended family joined, filling in the sides. I waited, not because I expected anything, but because a small part of me still hoped there had been a mistake. That someone would turn and say my name. No one did. At one point, one of the photographers glanced in my direction, then looked away just as quickly, as if I didn't belong in the frame even by accident. I lowered my eyes for a moment, letting out a slow breath. It should have hurt more than it did. Or maybe it did hurt, just in a quieter way. Not sharp or sudden, but steady, like something I had been carrying for so long that I barely noticed the weight anymore. I shifted slightly, leaning back against the wall, and let my thoughts wander. I remembered a different time, years ago, when Daniel and I used to sit on the floor of our old home, sharing simple meals and talking about everything we wanted to build one day. Back then, we didn't have much, but there was something honest in the way we lived. We relied on each other. Or at least, I thought we did. When his business started, I was the one he called. I didn't hesitate. I gave him what I had saved, thousands of dollars, because he said he needed it, because he promised it would help him get started. I never asked for it back. Not because I didn't care, but because I trusted him. Standing there now, watching him laugh under bright lights in a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine, I wondered if he even remembered those days at all. A server passed by with a tray of drinks, offering one with a polite nod. I took a glass, more out of habit than desire, and held it loosely in my hand. The cold surface grounded me, pulling me back into the present. The room felt different now. Louder, somehow. Conversations overlapping, music rising, chairs being moved as people prepared for dinner. I could feel the event shifting into its next phase, but I remained exactly where I had been placed, on the edge, unnoticed. That was when I saw the gift table. It was set near the far corner of the room, covered in a white cloth that matched everything else. Neatly arranged boxes and envelopes filled the surface, each one representing a gesture, an offering, a contribution to the life Daniel and Clara were building together. I stared at it for a moment, something inside me becoming very still. Then I began to walk. No one stopped me. No one even looked in my direction as I crossed the room. I moved calmly, my steps quiet against the polished floor, until I reached the table. Up close, I could see the details more clearly, the careful wrapping, the handwritten notes, the expensive paper. And then I found mine. It was simple compared to the others. A plain white envelope, my handwriting steady but unremarkable. It didn't try to stand out. I picked it up slowly, feeling the familiar weight of it in my hand. Inside was money, yes, more than the requested $500. But that wasn't the important part. The envelope also represented something else. Something I had kept to myself for a long time. Control. Not in a loud or obvious way, but in the quiet, structured way I had built my life. The way I had learned to understand systems, accounts, and the small details people often ignored. Daniel had trusted me once, not just as a sister, but as someone who could handle things he didn't want to think about. And I had never really let go of that access. I held the envelope for a moment longer, then slipped it into my bag. The movement was small, almost invisible. No one reacted. The room carried on as if nothing had changed. But something had. I turned slightly, looking back toward the center of the hall. Daniel was still there, still smiling, still surrounded by people who saw him the way he wanted to be seen. Clara stood beside him, radiant and composed, her presence filling the space effortlessly. They looked perfect. Untouchable. For a brief second, I wondered what would happen if I simply left without saying anything. If I walked out quietly, just another unnoticed exit in a day full of carefully managed moments. But then I thought about the wall, the seat, the word clean, and I realized something. Silence had never changed anything for me. I stepped forward just enough for my voice to carry, not loud, but clear. "Don't worry," I said. A few nearby conversations paused. Heads turned slightly, more out of curiosity than concern. I met Daniel's eyes across the room. "I'll stay out of the frame forever." There was a flicker of confusion on his face, like he was trying to understand what I meant, but couldn't quite place it. I didn't wait for him to figure it out. I turned and walked toward the exit, my step steady, my expression calm. The music continued behind me, filling the space I was leaving. No one called out immediately. No one rushed after me. The doors opened easily, and the cool air outside met me like a quiet welcome. As I stepped out onto the stone path, the noise of the wedding softened behind me, fading into something distant and unimportant. For the first time that day, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not sadness. Just clarity. I kept walking, away from the lights, away from the voices, away from the place where I had been asked to disappear. And this time, I knew I wasn't just stepping out of a room. I was stepping out of something much larger. Something I would never return to. The air outside felt different, like I had stepped into another world without even trying. The noise from inside the house faded quickly, replaced by a quiet that wrapped around me in a way that felt almost unfamiliar after everything I had just stood through. The sky above was dimming into evening, soft shades of grey and blue stretching wide, untouched by the artificial lights behind me. I walked down the long stone path slowly, my heels making a soft, steady sound with each step. I didn't rush. For once, I wasn't trying to catch up to anything or anyone. My hand rested lightly against my bag, where the envelope sat, no longer a gift, no longer an offering. Just something reclaimed. I had almost reached the gate when I heard it. "Ava, wait." His voice broke through the quiet, sharp and urgent. I stopped, but I didn't turn right away. For a brief moment, I closed my eyes, letting the sound settle. Then I exhaled slowly and faced him. Daniel was running toward me, his perfect composure gone. His tie was loosened, his breathing uneven, his expression no longer controlled. For the first time that day, maybe for the first time in years, he looked real. "What did you do?" he asked as he reached me, his voice low but tense. I looked at him calmly, studying his face the way he had barely studied mine when I arrived. There was panic there, confusion, and something else underneath, fear, perhaps. It didn't surprise me. "Why do you think I did something?" I replied quietly. "Don't do that," he said quickly, shaking his head. "Everything's falling apart inside. Accounts are frozen, payments aren't going through, people are calling me." And then, he stopped himself, running a hand through his hair. "And then those videos. Ava, what is this?" I held his gaze, not looking away. "Consequences," I said simply. The word seemed to land heavier than anything else I could have said. He stared at me like he was trying to piece together a version of me that he didn't recognize. "You can't just," he started, then stopped again, lowering his voice. "You don't understand what you've done." I tilted my head slightly. "No, Daniel. I understand it very well." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The distance between us felt different now, not just physical, but something deeper, something that had been there for a long time but had never been this clear. "I helped you," I continued, my voice steady. "When you had nothing, when you were asking for money, for support, for trust. I gave you all of that without asking for anything in return." "That was years ago," he said quickly. "Yes," I replied. "And you've spent every year since pretending it didn't happen." He looked away for a second, jaw tightening. "That's not fair." I let out a quiet breath. "No, what's not fair is being told to stand near a wall so I don't ruin a photo. What's not fair is having my seat given away like I don't exist. What's not fair is realizing that I was only ever important to you when you needed something." He didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched between us, heavier now, harder to ignore. "You could have just talked to me," he said finally, though his voice lacked the certainty it had before. "I did," I answered. "Many times. You just stopped listening." That seemed to settle something, whether he wanted it to or not. His shoulders dropped slightly, the anger in his expression shifting into something more uncertain. "What do you want?" he asked. It was a simple question, but it carried more weight than he probably intended. I thought about it for a moment, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to be sure he understood it. "Nothing," I said. He frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It does," I replied calmly. "I don't want your money. I don't want your apologies. And I definitely don't want a place in a life where I have to shrink myself just to fit." The wind moved softly around us, carrying the faint sound of music from inside, now distant and almost irrelevant. You've built something here, I continued, glancing briefly back at the house. A life that looks perfect from the outside. But it's built on things you chose to ignore. And now those things are showing up. His expression hardened slightly. You've ruined my wedding. I met his eyes again. No, Daniel. I stepped out of it. What happens now is just everything catching up. For a moment, it looked like he wanted to argue, to push back, to regain control of the situation the way he always had. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the certainty in my voice, or maybe it was the realization that I wasn't asking for anything anymore. I can fix this, he said after a pause, though it sounded more like he was trying to convince himself. Maybe, I said. But not the way you're used to. Another silence followed, quieter this time, less tense but more final. I took a small step back, increasing the distance between us. Not dramatically, just enough to make it clear that this conversation had reached its end. You wanted me out of the picture, I said. Now I am. He didn't move. He didn't try to stop me this time. And that, more than anything, told me everything I needed to know. I turned and walked toward the gate, my steps steady, my mind clear. Behind me, the large white house stood glowing under artificial lights, still full of people, still holding on to the version of the day they thought they were having. But for me, it was already over. As I stepped out onto the quiet road beyond, the night air felt cooler, fresher. I didn't look back again. There was nothing there for me anymore. For years, I had been standing just outside the frame of someone else's life, waiting to be seen, waiting to matter. Now, for the first time, I understood something simple and undeniable. I didn't need their frame at all. And as I walked forward into the quiet, I realized I wasn't losing anything. I was finally free.